Microphone. Microphone. Okay, is that better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Cool, guys. Literally, I was just like sitting. Ah! Hold on, it's gonna echo. Okay. Yikes. Okay. Literally, I was standing here going, guys, say something. Say something. Anybody? Oh, wow. So does anybody have anything you want to say? Wow, big mood. Okay, so a couple of things. Oh, guys, I'm so relieved that you guys are all responding in the chat. Amazing. Okay, what are y'all's thoughts? What do you want? I'm planning on just going through this sequentially, starting with frontier and kind of the big things you need to know about the frontier, and then moving on from that, and just kind of going chronologically. Is there anything you guys are particularly worried about and you really want to be sure I emphasize? Anything? Bueller, anyone? There's about a 15-second lag. So if it ever feels like you guys respond and then I take forever to like respond to that or something like that, or it just feels weird, it's because when I ask you a question, there's a 15-second lag between what I see and like when it happens and when you guys see it. Keep people in events. We can definitely do that. I'm gonna give you guys some time to like go through, y'all go through your packets. What questions do you have? Oh, Brenna, you have a fantastic teacher. I sometimes have to go to him and say, hey, remind me what this is, because I'm drawing a blank. Bum, 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 bum. Oh, you guys also missed me doing Star Wars stuff. I was definitely humming the Star Wars business. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, we will definitely go over that. I will say you guys do have some like token questions that from like lesson 1 that we keep going through. And y'all, if you didn't finish some of the stations or something like that, or you're looking at a handout and you're like, man, I did not do it that day. Everything has been posted to Google. So like go in and look at it again. Maybe that day in class, you were kind of having a tough time and you were spacing out, and give yourself kind of an opportunity to understand better what's going on. Because sometimes I think we don't go back and look at those things. I think there's value in revisiting some of the stuff we've done in class, because y'all, Mr. Walter and I work real hard to give you guys some fairly high quality things. Oh, goodness. Oh, my computer froze up. Hold on. I have to give it a second to like not hate everything. It gets temperamental. So with frontiers and settlement, just kind of putting into context where we are. So this is post-Civil War. And I say post-Civil War. Some of it is happening during the Civil War. Because, y'all, there's not a lot happening out west during that time period. Oh my gosh, my computer's driving me crazy right now. I can't see any of y'all's responses because I opened up a window that covered it, and then my computer acted like I punched it in the face, and now it's being sassy about letting me take care of business. Okay, I'm going to do something real quick. I don't think I'm going to lose you, but if I do, I'll be back. gosh, temperamental. Calm down, computer. Oof. Okay. Can I trade stars for money at the end of the year? What are stars? Oh, I'm so curious. Curiouser and curiouser. Could you go over periods 1 and 2, please? Erica, I'll just stop in like with the little things, but I think these questions that we're gonna show you have shown up on like every test. Okay, wait. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, no, that's fine. They've shown up on like every test, so there's that. Anything else you guys have that you're wondering about, curious about, living our best life about? Oh, I think this is not giving me the whole picture. Oh, all suspicious. Okay. So looking at the frontier, got a right ear, a left ear, and a frontier. It's a little New Girl humor for you. It's a TV show that I identify with in a very visceral way. You're wondering how you were going to use visceral in a sentence. I hope I just gave you a really bomb way to use it. Any questions you have? Okay, so we just want to go over all the things. Sorry, guys, it's taking like forever to just, get started with things. Okay, so starting with, let's start with the Great Plains and settlement. So people move out west. People are moving out west. Why are they moving out west? Well, largely we have two kind of things happening in the world at this point. I just realized that my version is apparently not caught up with where you guys are. So that's why everything looks confusing to me. Oh, this is super frustrating. Sorry, guys, I'm having some computer issues, and it is driving me bonkers. Okay. I want it to be live. Okay. So that said, I can't like see where everything is much more confusing than it needs to be. Right now, everything is happening. Okay, so settlements. Chrome keeps freezing up on me, but the live stream keeps going, so it just sounds like I legitimately am a crazy person. So good things are happening across the board. So basically we have, during this time period, there's a civil war going on in kind of the eastern part of the world. There's a civil war going on, and really we're not about we're not about that life. There's a lot of people who say, I'm looking for prosperity in the West. There is initially, so let me get some doodling going here. That's my United States, and no one can tell me that can't tell me it's not the best US you've ever seen. There's people that want to move out west mainly because it represents this idea of hope, of new beginnings. It represents a lot of really new and great things. That said, initially people are running there because of gold. People find gold there and everyone's like, oh my gosh, gold. Which is to say, everyone kind of thinks like, oh, if I can move out west, I can get gold. How awesome would that be? Well, then also, that's initially in like 1849. But what we're talking about really This is kind of prior to the time we're talking about. This is like 1849. We're talking about the time after this. And the time after this, when people start, I'm going to try to make this one like moderately better. Can't guarantee it's going to happen, but like we're going to try. You know, it's something. When people move out west, there's reasons that they're doing it. And largely it's because we've acquired this area here. But we note that it is very sparse. There's not a lot of people out there. And so what ends up happening is the government starts giving out these little plots of land. Please know this is not drawn to scale. Someone didn't get, you know, the entire state of Colorado. But like that's a mood right there. So we start with the Homestead Act. Can you guys give me some facts about the Homestead Act? And while you're at it, why don't we jump into some facts about the Dawes Act, which also had to do with land. And while we're at it again, and guys, be sure that you're saying what you're saying it's for. If it's for the Dawes Act, the Homestead Act, or we're also going to talk about the Morrill Act. What did these three things do? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of great things. The Homestead Act was basically, I want to say you got like a 60 acre plot, or maybe it was a 60 by 60 acre. Good, all the questions. You get a plot of land, and you promise that you're going to stay there and you're going to farm it for 5 years. You're going to stay and you're going to farm it for 5 years. This leads to some problems, and I'd love for you guys to let me know what some of those problems were. Don't forget to tell me about the Dawes Act and the Morrill Act, and also what problems come out of the Homestead Act. And mostly problems did farmers face, because we have to remember that these farmers who come out west, yeah, there's no rain and there's no wood out west. You know, Brianna, I was noticing that too, so I just tried to help it focus up a little bit. Maybe I can zoom it in. Is anyone remembering what the Dawes Act is? I don't think I've seen anybody talk about it. Or the Morrill Act. Dawes Act isn't an Indian conflict, not quite. Okay, so the Homestead Act, a few problems that come with the Homestead Act. There's in the Great Plains, there's no rain, and there's no wood. So people build sod houses. They learn how to irrigate. They learn different irrigation techniques. And largely, they also, because the land is so dry, they kind of come up with a steel-tipped plow. John Deere invents it. Hey, Sean. What up, homie, indeed. Okay, so the Dawes Act is what Ms. Puckett really considers probably one of the darkest, most awful, terrible things that have ever happened. So essentially, it was the plan. It was the plan that it is the plan that the U.S. had, where we thought we were helping. I think largely this guy in Massachusetts, a Massachusetts senator. You don't really need to know that he's from Massachusetts, but it's interesting to know that he's from Massachusetts and therefore does not do a whole lot with. Didn't do a whole lot with. It should be noted that he didn't do a whole lot. Didn't have a whole lot to deal with Indians, but he had this great idea. He said, "Hey guys, I got an idea. Let's go to the tribes and trade them." Be fair, I don't know if I'm writing super clearly. You're gonna have to kind of like listen and context clue it probably. Yikes. Yes, Erica will go back to farmers and ranchers. Remind me if I don't go back to it. So he's a Massachusetts senator, and he has this idea, and he says, "Here's the thing. You know what? Let's grant citizenship to Indians because we know that's what they've always wanted. Let's grant citizenship to the Indians, and here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we're going to do it. We are going to tell them that it's going to take a few years. We're going to give them a path to citizenship. They're going to hand us over their land, and we are going to give, we're going to look at their land, and we're going to give them 60 acres. We're going to give them each a certain plot. So if you were the head of your family, you were going to get 1,000 acres. The oldest boy would get and all the men in the family would get 100 acres. Woohoo! And it was going to be great. And then what would happen next is the men would get 100 acres, and then any leftover land that clearly you guys aren't using, we're just going to take. So we're going to divide up your land based on males in the tribe. And that leftover land, that's just going to go to the federal government. Now, here's what you might be thinking. Honestly, this doesn't sound so bad. At least they're getting to keep their land. Well, here's the trick. Not only, Kevin, they didn't what is an American citizen? They just wanted an autonomous region under their control. I would agree with that. They wanted to, have their own control. And so they said, that's fine. So if we do this, we get to control our land. And they're like, kind of, because we're going to divide up the land. If we do this and we divide up your land, you have to live as homesteaders. Do I need to write bigger, guys? They're going to live as homesteaders. They divide the tribe, and by doing so, they take away their power. And by doing so, they take away their power. Now I'm trying to have it focus. I don't know if it's actually doing it, though. Maybe I just write that sloppy. Anybody? Is anybody else having that problem? Are you guys able to at least like context clue it? How are we feeling? I just tried to like wipe the screen. I don't know if that's going to help anything. Weird. That was a weird moment. That was like the equivalent of your mom like finding something on your face and like licking her hand and like licking her thumb and like wiping it off. It's a weird move. Would it be better if I wrote bigger, you guys? Would that be helpful? I can, I just am not. Okay, I'm doing all I can, folks. I don't. It's not perfect. I'll start writing bigger. You'll probably be able to read it better at that point. I'm writing with like skinny pens, and so I'm feeling like I can write small, but I should probably write bigger. Okay, anyways. So that's the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act was supposed to grant citizenship to the Indians, but it divides up their land. Any leftover land now goes to the federal government. Now they're supposed to live as homesteaders, which is going to divide up the tribe and take away the tribe's power through this. So that is the Dawes Act. For the Dawes Act, a good way to remember it. If you could remember the phrase, does anyone think this is a fair deal? Which is to say, does anyone think this is a fair deal for the natives? Does anyone think this is fair? Because over here, I think they kind of get the... and it's basically to force natives to sacrifice their culture for the sake of American culture. That's not fair, man. I like that. Okay, so the next one, the Morrill Act. I think Alexander said it earlier. The Morrill Act was focused on building land-grant colleges. The Morrill Act was land-grant colleges. Was a land grant for military and agricultural colleges, like Texas A&M. She said, "This ain't it." It's true. True. And okay, so kind of going back, pedaling back to, oh, I guess you can't see the top there. Pedaling back over to where Erica had us before. Erica mentioned ranchers and cowboys. My students, please be aware there's different ways that you are going to be able to study tonight. I did put crowdsourced reviews on the Google Classroom, which basically means you guys can add, anybody can add to the review sheet, which means you guys are going to get a good opportunity to add value to each other's work. And if everybody adds to it, I don't want anyone staying up all night doing it, but if everybody adds to it, then you guys are going to have a good resource to go back and study throughout the day. And then also when the AP test comes around, you already have reviews made. I can try to get these out to you earlier next time. It was kind of a brainchild I had last night, which is why it was posted last night, but, you know, living our best. So one of the things that Erica talked about, though, was, or mentioned, was that the Homestead Act causes problems between ranchers and cowboys in something referred to as the Range Wars. And if you're in my class, you'll remember I showed you a really cheesy, as a day is long, real cheesy video called "The Farmer and the Cowboy Should Be Friends." Oh, the farmer and the cowman should be friends. One man likes to, the other likes to, but that's no reason why they can't be friends. And basically, they went through all the problems that the ranchers versus the cowboys were having. And you can hold your applause. I know that was truly just a really engaging moment there. Ranchers versus cowboys. So essentially, the rancher's job is to take his horse. The rancher's job is to take his horse and move the cattle. His job is to take his horse and herd the cattle across the Great Plains. Well, the problem is when, oh my gosh, guys, I'm an idiot. When I say ranchers, I mean, nobody even called me on this, guys. You're the worst. I say that and you're like, I didn't even know. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Same. The farmer. Silly me. The difference between a farmer and a rancher is that their ranches usually like hold animals. So it's the farmer. So the farmers were basically homesteaders. Farmers were homesteaders, and they didn't like when the cattle would come through, because when the cattle would come through, they would like step on everything, and they would crush the crops. They would eat the crops. And all of a sudden the farmer started putting up a very famous invention. You want to tell me what this is, or what I'm pretending it is? That's just such a terrible like example of it. You didn't know it's barbed wire, but yikes. This is why I'm an artist, and I don't know if you guys knew this, but like Erica takes lessons from me. Erica Noda taught her everything she knows about art, because clearly that's where she learned it. And Erica will concur with me on that as a student of my teachings. And right now, in this very moment, Erica's trying to figure out how to respond to that comment. So basically the farmers create the barbed wire so that the cattle stay off their land, but that makes the farmers mad, because now the farmers are having to go around all this stuff, and they're closing the range. And the range was made originally, or the range had always been used for cattle. Well, now the second thing that kind of ends this and kind of closes the open range is what? You guys remember the Pacific Railway Act? Or anything about it? Right. So railroads change all of that, because now we can put the cattle on trains. We can move them out west that way. The Pacific Railway Act was basically federal funds going to endorse transportation. And when that happens, the federal government starts helping supplement transportation. We're going to see a rise in just our economy, because we're going to see a rise in the economy because now goods can travel from custom designers up in New York, and they can travel all the way out west and reach just about anybody they want. And When that happens, all of a sudden we start having these things called like card catalogs, like Sears and Montgomery Ward. All these, they start sending out catalogs, and people could circle what they wanted in the catalog, and they would mail their order in. And when they sent in their mail order, they would receive that good. And it was a brand new, so with consumerism, you see a rise in consumerism, and we kind of create like the mail order goods. Montgomery Ward. Chinese built from the Chinese did build from west to east. The Irish build from east to west. The Irish. And they do work for much cheaper. We're going to see when we're looking at this rise of consumerism, we're going to see that comes from some other things that are happening out east as well. Meanwhile, let me double check and be sure I didn't miss anything. It's after the Civil War. Really after the Civil War, people want to move out west. And so they do. And the Homestead Act gave them land, gave them basically free federal land. The Dawes Act really sought to assimilate tribes to American culture and kind of get rid of their tribal identity. And then the Morrill Act created land grant colleges like Texas A&M. There's a lot of different goods found out west, such as silver. There was all the Comstock stuff, the gold that was found out there. So yes, I talked about those things. Okay. So all this kind of stuff is happening out west. We should also note that double check this. Guys, just remember that like this granting the federal government granting money or subsidies to build transportation lines and stuff like that is going to be very helpful as we kind of launch into this new age. So the next thing that we're looking at, this is what's happening out west. This is what's happening out west, because we have to remember that the west is the least developed. This is what's happening in the west. Back east, things are looking very different. So now we're going to kind of like migrate back across the map and see kind of what's going on everywhere else. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the New South. And this is in a post-Reconstruction New South. Okay, guys, tell me some of the struggles that Southerners were facing. Tell me some of the struggles that Southerners were facing. Tell me some of the struggles that Southerners were facing. Tell me what were some things you remember about the New South when we learned about it. What can you guys tell me about this time? Who was Henry Grady? What did he believe? Okay, I'm going to kind of jot y'all's buzzwords kind of everywhere. Like industry. Sharecropping. All right, we're gonna, oh, okay, so everyone's in debt, the farmers. Okay, so guys, we're gonna talk about farmers and populism here in a little bit. We will get there. We're gonna kind of pump the brakes on that. What else is the South having to get used to? It's not just like the lack of industry and things like that, but what else are they having to get used to? Okay, lack of industry, because they don't want to adapt. Freedmen. Poverty. Okay, so let's start with the lack of industry. So essentially, who was the person who believed that the New South could rise, and in the New South, we would have booming industry at every level? And then tell me, why did that 1000% not happen? Well, that's true. Laura, I'm going to read your response in just a second. Talking about lack of industry, for starters. Can you guys remember what they wanted to continue to grow? They didn't want to change it. They wanted it to stay the same. Henry Grady told them, hey guys, you should diversify. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. That's silly. Silly people diversify. Cotton and tobacco. They wanted to stick with cotton and tobacco. And y'all, please know, if nobody says anything, sometimes I'm waiting because I don't think you've heard. But if you just respond with, I'm not sure about this one. If you just respond with, like, I'm not sure about this one, and everybody else is probably going to respond with, yeah, me too. And that tells me it's something I need to go over, and not just like, oh, they just don't want to respond to this one. Because I can't see your faces to see if you're puzzled or just distracted. Puzzles. So why they want to stay the same. They want to be very traditional. It's kind of like their arch nemesis tells them, yeah, you should be just like us. And they're like, no, we don't want to. We like doing things our way. And Henry Grady believed, he had this very utopian idea that not only could the South change, but that everything was going to be coming up roses. He wanted an industrial South. He wants, I'm pretty sure he wanted Alabama, like Birmingham. To be like the center of steel production. He believes that, like, what else did he think? Relations between the races were wonderful, and like I want to say he said something like cordial and something else, but you're like, ooh, it's real cringy what he says. And these are his beliefs, and so I'm gonna kind of draw some like cutesy little sparkles. They're not really sparkles, but they're like sun waves, because it's like, look, he's dreaming. Because this is such a cute idea, but it's like not in reality. Ooh, I like that you mentioned that. Sabrina said, perfect democracy. He believed that what we also needed to do was we needed to take apart, he thought this would just be real chill, which also, it's never going to happen. But he said, here's the thing. If we can just divide up all of these big plantations, give them to the people, let people farm their own land, work their own land, they're going to get money. And then just like imagine how wonderful it's going to be. This is going to be like a perfect democracy. Everyone has their own little pocket of heaven. Which, you know, not true. Not a thing that happens at all. And he gives this speech, and yeah, it's not a true thing. So it's very much not a true thing. And so that's Henry Grady's like delusions. It comes from like a fictional book that I'm going to draw here called The Delusions of Henry Grady. And that's what this is, The Delusions of Henry Grady. I got a pocket full of heaven. Oh, see, I wanted to say sunshine, and then I really wanted to do the thing from that movie where she was like, I gotta. Thanks, Emma Stone, for giving us that gem of a moment. Okay, so one of the issues we're having is with freedmen. So there's this group of people, in the South called the Redeemers, which, you know, has a very like religious tone. It's a very religious tone, but not religious. And they are going to redeem the South from her northern, you know, people, from the Northerners who, you know, only sought to destroy her. And they are going to institute Jim Crow. They're going to institute Jim Crow laws. They're going to institute Jim Crow laws. They're going to kind of they're going to basically slow down anything that could be used to like really help rebuild the South and change it and industrialize it. If you guys remember, they take money like out of education to pay off their debts, which is like a good thing, but ultimately, yikes. The Jim Crow laws impacted freedmen. We had sorry guys, I'm checking out something. It impacted freedmen, and essentially the Redeemers institute Jim Crow laws. They impact freedmen. We have there's lynchings that happen in the South, which is basically where a mob gets their own takes the law into their own hands. I believe it's Ida Tarbell. Can you guys fact check that for me? Ida Tarbell is the one who fights against that. And she's going to actively seek to fight against lynchings and that practice being like socially acceptable. Sharecropping is first done primarily by freedmen, but then also eventually poor white people. And it just is kind of like a cycle of poverty. Ida B. Wells. Oh, sweet. Ida B. Wells. Oh, and she gets rid of it. And she fights to get rid of slavery. Or not slavery. Lynchings. Sharecropping creates kind of a cycle of poverty for freedmen and poor whites. At this time, the South is riddled with poverty. The South is riddled with poverty. It's a huge problem. They are not only poor, but they're uneducated because remember how I told you guys, it's the first place that money is taken out of, and the last place money is put back into is education. Even back then. So we have a very uneducated South, and this poverty is leading them to be leading the South to be very frustrated. They are frustrated. And they're distrusting of the North because they really believe they had everything. They were the wealthiest people in the United States, and then this happens and they lose everything. Even the prior to this, the really wealthy lose a lot. So that's kind of the New South, kind of in a nutshell. Moving on to, we've done the frontier, we've done the New South. Now we're going to move on to populism. I kind of want to touch base on industrialization because that's what's happening in the South. Now we're kind of going east to in the North east we have okay, that was going to be really cool, but then I got lazy. Look, they were supposed to be like towers. I was trying to make a cool doodle. It was going to take much longer than I needed it to, though, and a lot more space. Look, it's buildings, smokestacks, those things. So the industrial age. So we kind of usher in the Northeast, we usher in this industrial age. As we usher into this new and industrial age, we're going to find a few things happen. Everything changes a little quicker than our government can keep up with it. Because keep in mind, our government has just, we've lost a president. We're trying to rebuild the South. We've got this whole like Western territory opening up. We got people moving out there. We have a lot going on. And so when the Northeast, we see people getting wealthy, we see businesses booming, we see good things happening. Really, the government just kind of decides to leave them alone for a while. But in leaving them alone, some not so great things kind of arise out of that. And so among those things is kind of the rise of the robber barons versus captains of industry. What can you guys tell me you know about that? Robber baron versus captain of industry. So we have robber barons versus captains of industry. Does anybody know the difference? They are two different names for the same group of people. Yes. Who are the people? Well, like a lot of the big buildings in New York are named for a lot of these people. Okay, so we have Rockefeller, we have J.P. Morgan, we have Carnegie, and we have Vanderbilt. These are kind of the bigwigs of the time. These are the bigwigs of the time. So, yikes. So, Rockefeller essentially, can you guys tell me how Rockefeller makes his money? And y'all, if you don't know, just like look it up. Somebody look it up. Somebody look up how J.P. Morgan makes his money. Somebody look how Carnegie makes his money. Somebody look up how Vanderbilt makes his money. While you guys are doing that, I'm going to kind of set up this era, because this era gets a nickname by Mark Twain. Mark Twain looks at this era and Mark Twain looks at this era and refers to it as the Gilded Age. Because on the outside, we have things like this happening. These robber barons, these captains of industry are making all the money in the world. And then at the same time, we have farmers that are drastically poor. We have societal issues just raining down on us. Okay. So, Vanderbilt, I'm seeing you guys said, so we said Rockefeller is oil. He makes his money in oil. I literally thought I grabbed a black pen and I just grabbed the same pen I had before. He's oil. Rockefeller is oil, and I'm gonna make Rockefeller. Make any loops I see black, so it's kind of like that's the oil. And he creates Standard Oil. Now, something that he does that kind of keeps his money. Do you guys know what he practiced that made that? What did Rockefeller practice that made him so wealthy? Was it horizontal integration or was it vertical integration? He practiced horizontal integration. What is another word for horizontal integration? A monopoly. Another word for that is basically a monopoly. Horizontal integration was something that was talked about in the stations. It's essentially where where you have someone that controls all of the industry. Like they control all the railroads. And when they control all the railroads, that means that they get to control, or in this case, they control all the oil companies. They buy up all the oil companies. So basically, they control the price of oil in the U.S. Well, that doesn't feed competition well, and so we don't generally have that. There is another type of integration referred to as vertical integration, which is something that like Tyson Chicken does. Tyson Chicken has vertical integration. They own like the seed farms. They buy like vertical, you buy out the supply line. Right, Kevin, that's perfect. That's a perfect way of saying it. Basically, you have the hatchling places, like for Tyson's Chicken, you have like the hatchling places, you have the chicken farms, then you have the butcher thing, and then you have the frozen thing, then you have the packaging, and you have the distributor, and kind of all the way up, you have all the different pieces. Rockefeller, though, real long name too, that feller. Horizontal integration is his thing. J.P. Morgan, we said he was a banker, I think is what I read you guys said. What did Carnegie make his money doing? Carnegie was steel. Carnegie was the steel man. He was all about steel. Carnegie puts his focus on steel, makes a lot of money through steel. Anything else you guys have to add about Carnegie? Anything else you want to say about Carnegie? Tony, we're glad to see you. Because Carnegie did something different than everybody else. So Carnegie, he makes all of his money in steel. Christine, explain undercutting the market. So, like what you say, I want you to explain it. Laura Rockefeller was horizontal. Vertical was I was just explaining the difference. Rockefeller is horizontal. His name is really long, so I always think that, like, he has, like, the longest name, so it's horizontally the longest. Christine, are you able to explain undercutting the market? Okay, like super low prices to the other companies. Oh, yes, okay. Super low prices to where the other companies would hemorrhage money trying to compete with him, always ruining and always running his factories, and then decrease the price of their own products to beat the competition. And then as soon as the competition came in, then he could drive up prices. So he undercuts the market. That is what he did. But he also believed in something referred to as the gospel of wealth. What does that mean? The rich would be the trustees of the poor, they would support them. The wealthy owe it to the poor. The poor, I should say the care of the poor is entrusted to the wealthy. Basically, the poor need us in order to survive. They need us in order to, it kind of sounds like paternalism. It's like the thing is, like, poor people need us. They really do. They need us to look out for them. I don't think it was meant to sound as condescending. It was really meant to be helpful. Like, and, Carnegie, Rockefeller, they give away a large portion of the money that they make throughout their lives. I think one of them ended up giving away almost all of his wealth. I want to say it was Rockefeller, but I could be wrong. Could have been Carnegie. So I mean, they did do a whole lot, and we can't super fault them for that. It lines up with, what was the other movement at this time that sounds kind of similar to this, but is really more run by churches. It's similar to a church movement. Because there's two other ideas that are kind of similar to this. And they kind of feed both ways. One is a church idea, and one is more of a science one. Church is the social gospel, meaning there's a duty we have to the poor to help them. The scientific one is social Darwinism, which means the wealthy are wealthy because they're supposed to be wealthy, and the poor are poor because they're meant to be poor. And maybe the poor are just going to kind of like fall wayward. Okay, there were two groups who, and there's two kind of other businesses during this time. It's on y'all's list of things to review. But there's two other businesses that kind of arise out of this time through this mail order thing that's happening. The mail order catalogs, we have two companies that do that. What are they? Sears is one, very good. And there's one more that I mentioned. Anybody got information on Vanderbilt, by the way? Do we have that up here? I haven't finished him yet. That was relevant. Okay. Montgomery Ward. A lot of your parents might know Montgomery Ward. They used to be a really big deal. But Montgomery Ward is really the first actually to have the mail order catalogs, which become a big deal after the railroad. And speaking of railroads, then we also have Vanderbilt. We have Vanderbilt, who's kind of puppeteering the railroads. How would the railroad companies, what would they do? Vanderbilt, the railroads. What would they do though to, what would the railroad companies do to make more money than maybe they would have otherwise? They would have high freight rates. Hold on. Promethean's about to shut down on me. No. Oh, that's not what I wanted. It's a lie. She's a liar. She didn't want that. That's wrong. They would overcharge farmers. Okay, they would make longer than necessary railroads. How would they get longer than necessary railroads, though? What would they do? They would add in curves. Curves to make more money. And so all of this is happening. We have people like Rockefeller, like Morgan, like Carnegie, like Vanderbilt, who are making bajillions of dollars. They're making tons and tons of money. Meanwhile, as all these businesses are kind of booming, there's other stuff. This is all kind of like the good. This is the joy, but what's happening beneath the guild? So this is all, if this is all like the gold and the shiny, this is all gold and shiny. Underneath it is the dark and scary and the ugly. Tell me some of the dark and scary and the ugly. What are some of the ugly things that are happening? Let's talk first socially. Mama, that's a big mood. It's a lot going on for you, boo. There's tons of debt, especially in terms of the populist farmers, child labor. Child labor is becoming an issue. There's bad working conditions. Tenement houses. Simple repetitive tasks that end up dehumanizing the people who work them. It's very true. I'm trying to check a few things. Immigrant manipulation, immigrant discrimination, nativism. Okay, so we're going to have nativism be its own thing. This is having to do with immigration, so immigrant manipulation. We have immigrant discrimination. We have the rise of ethnic neighborhoods. We have unskilled workers. Okay, so with child labor becomes a huge issue during this time. Child labor, the working conditions are terrible. The working conditions give rise to labor unions. Tenement houses, what do tenement houses give rise to? What comes out of like the tenement houses being so terrible? And guys, tenement houses are the place where like 10 people lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's super dehumanizing because they're really like, they're in there just, it's not really a home. It's a place where you sleep between going to work. Josh, I wouldn't exactly call it slums because they were buildings. They were buildings. It wasn't like we'll learn about like the Hoovervilles later, during the Great Depression, and it's not that. These are buildings, that were not meant to be quite so awful, but they're just terrible. Infectious living conditions, cholera, and all the poop. But tenement houses give rise to settlement houses, which are different and kind of help people get their lives sorted, kind of like whole house. Child labor, they start instituting new laws about age, about how old you have to be in order to work. And I know that some of you know that very well because there are certain jobs you were not allowed to. Miss Barry is calling me. Got a message her telling her, can't talk, I'm doing a live stream. Live streaming for my class. Sometimes I have friends. So all of these things, we have new laws, there's new ages, all these things are getting passed. So this is something that's kind of happening socially because it's really unsustainable. And largely, guys, why are all these things problems? What hasn't quite caught up with, Barry Allen did call me just now. That's who that was. What is missing here? And all these big problems, what was the one thing that needed to happen that hadn't happened yet? I'll wait for you guys to say it, but I feel like you guys are afraid to say things right now. Government intervention. Class stratification. Yes, that was something that happened. Right. Government regulation. Because the government wasn't there to regulate these things, and because the government was caught up doing other things, the government missed the regulation of these things. They missed the regulation of working conditions. We're going to see rise to like, guys, there's so many things that happen. The Sherman Antitrust Act, that, I don't know if it's going to be on this test. I think that might be on your next test because that's more progressives, I think, versus Gilded. The Antitrust Act was just like, we can't have monopolies. And we just need to bust up all the monopolies. What can I say except you're welcome for the no. Hey, it's okay, you're welcome. I'm just an ordinary demigod. Okay, so the manipulation of immigrant manipulation, that is through definitely the political machine. And we're going to see that through people like Boss Tweed. That's the guy who, like, as soon as people would, corruption due to pressure from large corporations. Yes, Josh, there's some of that. But the immigrant manipulation also comes from, like, the political machines, which were basically, like, the people in the town who had control over, kind of the ins and outs of the town. They knew what was happening. They knew kind of who to call, who were the big shots. And they know this, and therefore they can like help set people up with jobs. And they want to help set people up with jobs, but they'll only set you up with a job if you vote for who they want you to vote for. Tammany Hall was Tammany Hall was Boss Tweed's political machine. So immigrant discrimination, it came in a lot of different forms. And it was largely, one of the big reasons was because this group of immigrants didn't speak English, which, you know, big mood. People took issue. They didn't speak English. They were unskilled. And so, they struggled to assimilate. One of the ways that they're unskilled and they don't speak English. They don't speak English. So in order to kind of, there's ethnic neighborhoods, but where do the children go in order to be better assimilated? Where does assimilation happen? Public schools. We send children to schools, and that is where they assimilate. That's where they get Americanized. That's where they get more and more Americanized. And all of this kind of comes to pass because of, and so then we have the rise of ethnic neighborhoods. We have these unskilled workers, immigrant manipulation. Socially, we have child labor, we have working conditions, we have tenement houses, and all of these things are happening. This great disparity between. So we have like the rich here. So this right here, all this represents the rich. And everything pretty much down here represents the poor. And we talked about the stratification of social classes. Very good, Bree. They lose their own, the immigrants lose their own culture in the process. The stratification, though, between social classes, why would some argue that that's not a problem? Because what is that stratification? Sometimes it's a symptom of kind of a greater thing. It's not just like, oh, this is something that happens in the Gilded Age. It's something that happens under a system. And what system is that we're talking about? Hoping I asked that question correctly. Yikes. Capitalism. So capitalism is the system. And in capitalism, it thrives on competition and free enterprise, or a laissez-faire economy, which means little government control. So competition, meaning companies compete to see who has the better pricing, which is why monopolies are not really capitalistic. Free enterprise is where we have minimal government interference. We don't have the government trying to take over a bunch of companies. We don't have the government trying to kind of slow down how big and great a business could be. But sometimes they do that by putting a lot of taxes on businesses. And that's like one of the reasons for the division even between political parties currently is how do we treat businesses? So we have competition versus free enterprise. Competition and free enterprise are kind of the hallmarks of capitalism. Under a competition thrives when we can't have monopolies though. We can't have monopolies. If we're functioning under a capitalist system, monopolies work against that because it gets rid of competition. And free enterprise, competition keeps prices low, profit encourages production. We kind of let people buy and sell based on their buy and sell based on supply and demand. citizen, but like it's more citizen, and capitalism is run by citizens. Citizens own businesses and really kind of determine how much or how little we're making. Does that make sense? It's because of Rockefeller, and to be fair, like a lot of these guys were trying to do that. Like Rockefeller just kind of mastered it first. You know, every time I'm trying to focus this, it's like not focusing. It's kind of silly. I can't quite see what it is, why it's so silly, but it's real silly. Mm-hmm. Okay, are we good? Okay, how do we feel about industry? Industry in the Gilded Age. The last thing I'm going to talk about is populism. Okay. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is the populist movement. So the last thing we're going to talk about is populism. The Populist Party would be otherwise referred to as sorry guys. Okay, populism. So this would be the People's Party. And essentially we had a few different kind of groups that put this into existence. Link. We have a few things that kind of breathe this into existence. It starts with that guy. He kind of goes around and he's checking in with people like, hey, how are you guys doing? I want to say his last name was like Kelly, Oliver Kelly, maybe. He goes around and basically he realizes people need a common place to talk because farmers are really isolated. And so in order to get them unisolated, he creates something called the Grange. It's actually called like the Patrons of Husbandry, but it becomes known as the Grange. It's the first national farm. It's the first national farm organization. It's the first national farm organization. They don't really get anything done. They have this idea that they're going to have cooperatives, which are Actually, no. They kind of talk about getting things done, but they get nothing done. Out of that is the Farmers Alliance, who have this idea that they're going to get things done by getting together in cooperatives, and that is how they were going to just really just mess everything up to change policy. But they bite off more than they can chew, and actually nothing ends up happening. So that happens, and then this gives rise to, this is the history. This is kind of like the origin story. Because then what happens is in because then what happens is in 1892, in the presidential election, the Populist Party puts forth a candidate. Cooperatives, Sabrina, cooperatives are just like groups of people working together for change. Yes, Kevin, very good. 1892, the Populist Party puts a candidate on the ballot. They have a candidate on the ballot. Let's see. And in the 1892 election, I believe Grover Cleveland gets the vote. Grover Cleveland is elected to his second non-consecutive term. He was president for 4 years, then wasn't president, and I think Harrison was president, and then he becomes president again. So essentially, as goes the way, I think, can someone double check that before I mark it on my paper for me? Just, making sure that I'm not crazy. But what we do know is that the third party candidate, which really did have, because guys, remember the Farmers Alliance had that group had 1.5 to 3 million people in it. It was a decent size. But third party candidates lose, have a history of losing elections. Can somebody look up? I think it was Republican Grover Cleveland that wins the 1892 election. Or was he a Democrat? Now I can't remember. I thought he was a Republican. So he was a big dude, and he kind of looked like an elephant. Maybe that's not a kind way to remember that, but Democrat President Grover Cleveland, things I didn't know. In a rematch of the closely contested 1888 election, former Democratic President Grover Cleveland defeats incumbent President Benjamin Harrison. So fun fact, there's this movie by Disney called The One and Only Original Family Band. It's a weird movie. There is a song where they sing an election song for Grover Cleveland, and it says let's put it over for Grover, don't rock a boat, give him your vote. And I don't really know what else is in the song, but let's put it over for Grover. That's the winner for me. He wins so he defeats incumbent President Benjamin Harrison, but in 1884 to 1888 things. Hey Dallas, we've been going. Honestly, we didn't really get started until about 6:50. So we're about an hour and 20 minutes in. So Grover Cleveland gets elected. Jesse, 99 minutes, all of the minutes. Yikes. Okay. So Grover Cleveland living his best life. So the Populist Party loses. So they realize that they can't really hitch their horse to that wagon anymore. So in the next election, so they really need to, I hate to say they need to like tighten up, but they need to kind of like get their act together because they don't do what they hope to do. So they come up with a few things that they want. Dallas, we're probably going to go for, I hope, no more than about 15 minutes because I'm still at school and I would desperately like to straighten up my room and then leave. Unless anybody would volunteer to come in early tomorrow and before the test help straighten up the room and pick up all these colored pencils and textbooks and just like things that are just out from the day, it'd be super. Go over Cleveland. Okay, so the Populist Party has their platform, and they put out their platform in 1896. I mean, technically, Dallas, I can be here until usually, I would say 10, but like you eventually get kicked out by the janitors because they want to go home because they've been here. Alexander, I would so appreciate if you could come in earlier and help me out. The Populist Platform in 1896. So the Populist Platform comes out in 1896, and it kind of lays out. Can you guys just state some of the things that the Populist Platform says? What do they want? And I'll kind of explain them to you as they come. That would be great, Brianna. Seeing a lot of you guys are coming up with good stuff. Seeing good things. I'm seeing good things. Okay, so essentially, the Populist Platform comes out of the fact that farmers are in debt. And I saw some of you guys talk about the problem with how they did taxes. The problem with how they did taxes at the time. These people are in debt. They, oh my gosh, I can't with my words. These people are in debt. And everyone, they supply food that like runs our country, and yet I'm not going to get kidnapped. I have a plan. It's fine. And also I have a really heavy bag. I could just like swat at anybody. Like they're not going to play. It's going to be chill. Okay, so a few things that we have kind of going on during this time period. We have, okay, so this is a ballot. And one of the things that we want is the direct election of senators, because it's believed There's two things really that we want: direct election of senators. And then the other thing that we really want is the secret ballot. Because it was really believed that the government has turned in the favor of big business. Essentially, big business is not going to... Big business will not do well. Our big business is doing really well, and they're basically running the government. It's the aristocracy, it's the wealthy and the elite who are running things. And so because of that, we want to be sure that we can directly elect our senators, which means we can pick a common man to do that. They wanted shorter work days. They don't want the work days to be forever and a day. They want to regulate the railroads because, remember, the railroads would really gouge them with the prices. They would make it really expensive for farmers to put their goods on the... Oh my gosh, they make it really expensive for farmers to put their goods on the train. And so essentially that meant that the farmers would... and it's largely because they were far away from where the farmers were, and to have a train go out there and stop and wait to be loaded, it cost them money. So they didn't want to do it. So they just made it really expensive for farmers. Farmers also want taxes to be they wanted graduated income tax. They wanted people to be taxed based on the percentage of their income, which I always joke that I like, because let's not have Sid name one person that wants to... Let's not do that. That feels silly. Okay, so graduated income tax. So basically it's this idea that the graduated income tax, the wealthy should be taxed more. The wealthy should have to give back more. Kind of, it's like a government version of Carnegie's gospel of wealth. The wealthy, it's their job to give to the poor, and they're like, okay, it's your job to give to the lesser, give to everyone who's lesser than you, which is literally everyone. But the big one here, and the one that I kind of waited to the end to talk about, because I feel like this is the one you guys are gonna have the most questions about, is the gold standard and the unlimited coinage of silver. They also want the unlimited coinage of silver. Otherwise, unlimited or the free coinage of silver. So essentially what this is prior to this time period... Let me make myself a little box. This is going to be our box about the gold standard. So basically, here's how things were. We have a fort called Fort Knox, and that is where all the gold is. I feel like I always start off really bold with my force perspective things, and then it just kind of slowly ends in tragedy. I know kind of what it's supposed to be. So gold. And for however much amount of gold, that is equal to the amount of money that is printed at the bank. Well, let's say that this is the machine that prints the money, and there's a conveyor belt. I don't really know what's happening here. This looks like a bed with a stripe on it. I don't even know. And so we have money. We have the machine that prints money, and all of the money we have, all of this money is equal to the amount of gold that we have. Oh, wow, I need to move this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more for you because you're going to want to see this really stellar artwork. Oh, look at that. Yikes. Okay, so the amount of gold that we have is equal to the amount of money that we print. Therefore, if there's not a lot of gold, we don't have a lot of money in circulation. Well, the farmer said, well, here's the deal. That gold is all well and good, but right now you're showing you only got like 4 blocks of gold in there. And to be fair, there's way more than 4 blocks of gold. This isn't bucket just, doing a bit. So to add to all this gold, they say, well, let's add to that gold, and let's print not just as much gold as we have, but also as much silver as we have. Let's coin silver as well. And so then we would print not only, this is such a weird thing that I'm doing here. This thing that I'm drawing out, this is supposed to be a conveyor belt. It feels like that's probably not what it is, but it goes into a box or a pile of money. It's a big stack of money. So this is from gold, and then we have one for silver as well. Guys, I do not know how I feel about committing to this conveyor belt drawing. The conveyor belt has been drawn. It's a weird mood. It's a weird mood. It's a weird mood. And then stacks on stacks on stacks on stacks. And then imagine if we had silver. They're like, we'd have like way more money. How great would that be? Because there's way more silver out there than there is gold. What is happening basically in this picture? Sorry. What is happening to the value of money in the bottom picture? Essentially, it's getting inflated. And basically the idea was if the money is inflated, then it'll make it easier for farmers who are in debt because of the machines they've had to buy and all this other stuff. The value decreases. That's right, because the value decreases. Therefore, you need more to pay for what you paid for before, and so this causes inflation, which means each dollar is worth less. Well, here's the thing: your debt doesn't change, and so now all of a sudden it's way easier to make $100 than it was before because the value is decreased. Well, now if your debt was $100 and it's easier to make $100, then you're in good shape and you can pay off your debts quicker. That's what the farmers want, because they want more money in circulation so that it's easier for them to pay off their debts. And they're like, the common man needs more money in our pockets. Basically, there's not enough money going around, and it's all because of this gold standard. Well, they weren't the only ones who believed that, because in 1896, the populists kind of enter a new phase. And in this new phase, so then we're going here. The 1896 election. Sorry guys, I'm trying to find like colors I haven't been using, which is like a lot of them that I haven't been using. So 1896 election. So in the 1896 election, things kind of take a turn. In 1896, William Jennings Bryan, who is a Democrat. He's a Democrat who believes, though, in the free coinage of silver. He jumps in on the silver debate. And populists throw their support to him. So now all the populists are going to support this Democrat, William Jennings Bryan, because at least he supports their philosophies. At least he supports their philosophies. At least he supports their ideas. And so they support William Jennings Bryan. They throw their support his way. And then out of that, William Jennings Bryan is not elected. William Jennings Bryan is not elected, and in 1896, the new president is Republican McKinley. McKinley wins. And essentially, if this was like an animated thing, all of this would fall away because it all kind of goes away. But what ends up sticking, though, is the populist ideas. The Populist Party platform. The Populist Party's platform is going to become kind of the hallmark of the progressive era, and a lot of the things that are going to get accomplished during the progressive era and eventually come true for America in general was first put forth by the Populist Party in their platform in 1896. Sid, is this that thing where you're supposed to come up to the front and talk to me and then you didn't? Like, I pulled kids in for small group for this specific part. I mean, I think you were there. I feel like you were there, Sid. Could be wrong. Any other questions you guys have? Anyone would like to chime in and tell Sid that yes, we did learn this? That'd be super awesome. Yeah, Sid, that's when we learned. That's when we learned all this about populism. Strikes and worker unions, we didn't, Jesse. That is not going to show up a whole lot on this test. For the AP test, you should know like the Pullman Strike. You should know some of that information. But I'll say this test is mostly focused on the stuff that leads to the progressive era. And while unions form out of the fact, what you need to know kind of about this time period is that unions form because the government isn't regulating things well enough, and people need to figure out how to regulate themselves, I guess. Sid, I thought everybody was literally at the table. Were you not at the table? Were you like, did you kind of like try to like lean back and sit further away? Specific Native American conflicts, you don't. I know on the word searches that those are like rampant. But mostly those are going to help you with the AP test. Those can help you with the AP test, even though the AP test probably won't go too far into Native Americans. It's kind of just good to hold on to that information and just know it. You probably need to know Helen Hunt Jackson. Helen Hunt Jackson is the one who she did a thing. Someone say what Helen Hunt Jackson did. But she did a thing that was important. Sid, I feel like you were, and I feel like we like made the joke that like you were like really tired. It's chill. Aw. You're so nice. You're so nice, Dallas. Dallas is calming Sid down. We're trying to. Anybody have any further questions? Helen Hunt Jackson. Yeah, Jesse, we didn't talk about her explicitly, but I do know that she's someone that kind of pops up on lists and things. All things happening. So no other questions? You guys are good? See, 24 of you are watching. Ooh, very good, Sabrina. That's what I wanted. Okay. Helen Hunt Jackson was a writer and the author of the 1881 book, A Century of Dishonor. The book exposed the U.S. government's many broken promises to Native Americans and improved the treatment of Native Americans. For example, the government wanted Native Americans to assimilate and give up their beliefs and ways of life to become a part of white culture. There you go. Brenna, calm down. Do your best. That's all we can do. And guys, we need to be engaged in class. We need to ask questions when we have them, and not get hung up on what's being graded in that moment. And also, guys, just go back and look at some of the stuff. Like there's, go back and look at some of the lessons. Again, I recommend filling out the crowdsourced review sheet for sure. Jesse's not even in your class, Sid. And Sid, you asked good questions today. Like your questions made sense. Anybody else have questions, thoughts, or concerns? Brianna, thanks for reminding me. I'll call Miss Gary back. Sid, if you drop to L, you're going to be retaking the first half of government your senior year. You'll take the not first half of government, you'll take the first half of U.S. history and be in a class with juniors. The Pullman Strike, that was unsuccessful. I want to say it had to do with what it led to. Like that strike alone may have been unsuccessful, but I want to say didn't it lead to a bunch of other strikes? Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Ew, juniors, the worst. Oh, Eli, you were missed. You didn't comment at all. It was a bummer. Any other questions, you guys? Eli, if you have any questions, if you ask them right now, I can tell you whether or not we answered that question during the live stream. The answer to number 115. Jesse, captains of industry, it's another name for, some people saw Carnegie, Rockefeller, and all of them. Some people saw them as captains of industry. Others saw them as robber barons, people who kind of cheated their way to the top. So it just kind of depends on what you saw them as. A captain of industry is a positive connotation, a robber baron, it's a negative connotation. Yeah, Jesse. No, Sabrina, he's asking what the answer to number 1 on the test is, and I told him the answer was 15. Eli, it's just the difference between a robber baron and a captain of industry is they're the same people, but it's just how you viewed them. Did you view them as a robber baron, that they just got their riches by unsavory means, or do you view them as a captain of industry? They, or like, as in like, they were titans of their time. They're the reason, they're the men who made America. There's literally a History Channel series documentary thing. You can have it going on in the background while you're working that literally talks about, it's literally called The Men Who Built America. It's a big movie. Just as a reminder for my kiddos, you have crosswords on the Google Classroom. You have the crowdsourced review that you each have, you all have editing rights to. So add to that. Try to add at least 2 things to it. Tell your friends to add to it. It'll be good. All right, later, Gators. I'm going to sign off.